All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to have everyone here for the second to last research group meeting. I thought it's really important to have a few meetings where we do some reflection. And one of the really big reflection is, the type of work that we do in TCI is quite different from most of the other graduate Ph.D. research programs. What we take very seriously here is the idea that a Ph.D. research question has to be something that's meaningful at the ground level. It's something where the result of that research has immediate applicability. And so we work on applied problems more than theory. Not that theory is not important, but this group is very much more an applied group. We also take it as a serious part of our mission to do applied work on the ground, to do it in places where we are addressing the problem with the people who are facing the problem. We are studying and analyzing the problem with people who are directly impacted by a particular problem and looking at ways to solve it with them. And so this action-oriented research is a big part of our mission and the way we operate as TCI. And I also believe that doing intensive field work which is applied and which is action-oriented is not in any way in conflict with having an academically rigorous PhD thesis that can be published in the best journals. So the idea that somehow academic rigor and fieldwork are two separate things is something that I like to kind of disprove. I like to show that you can do both. You can be meaningful in an applied sense, but still have academic rigor. So that's what we've been promoting over the last few years in this program. And we've had a few pioneers out there who've done the field work, who've gone out and who've come back to having done the field work and now are in the final stages of the analysis and putting out together. Should also not forget that our very first PhD student who was in the field, Soumya Gupta, who graduated a couple of years ago, ended up getting a major international award for her work, the Laura Cantor Award, which was given by the International Center for Research on Women, for her work looking at women's empowerment in agriculture. So we're very proud of that achievement, and we're looking forward to more of these high-level achievements coming soon through the work that our students are currently doing on the ground. So most of you know our two speakers today, or panelists. Tanvi Rao, who is just about to walk and get her degree, and so she'll soon be Dr. Rao for all of you. And Tanvi was out in the field in Jharkhand a year ago, right? And Maureen Valentine, for those of you who may not know, was in the field even the day that I arrived in Ithaca to start my role as the director of TCI. And one of my first tasks was to figure out some visa issues that were going on in the field. And so we had some very interesting moments on the telephone sorting some things out. But that was when Maureen was in the field doing her master's thesis research. So as you all know, Maureen has just come back from India, having spent a year in Orissa working on her thesis for her animal science PhD. So I'll go through and I'll ask a set of questions. And if you feel that there's something immediate that you want to ask, please feel free to do so. But then at the end, we'll have a much more animated discussion with everybody. So let me start, both of you, and say, give me elevator pitch of what your thesis is about and what your big findings are going to be. Start with Tanvi.
Okay, so as Prabhu introduced me, I'm Tanvi Rao. I'm a final year Ph.D. candidate in the Department of Applied Economics here at Cornell, and I did my fieldwork in Jharkhand. So the goal of my project was to understand better the role of subjective beliefs. So the role of subjective perceptions that high school students have about labor market outcomes and labor market returns that are associated with three main different post-secondary education tracks. So the beliefs that they have not just about labor market returns, but also post-secondary costs and how that impacts their higher education enrollment decisions. So sort of the main pitch here was the fact that I wanted to collect and study the role of subjective beliefs. That is what students actually use when they make these decisions to decide on what to study after they finish school. And that's kind of a new angle to looking at these type of problems within the field of economics and education. So one of the other things that was a part of the data collection effort was an experiment that was built in between the two rounds of data collection, and this experiment looked at the impact of providing high school students with information about labor market earnings that are conditional on different post-secondary tracks that are sort of currently measured in the economy, and sort of looking at how that information causes students to update beliefs about what their own returns would be if they were to enroll in each of these tracks, and how that impacts their education decisions. So that's kind of like in a nutshell a description of my field project. It was done. The project was in Ranchi, which is the capital city of Jharkhand, and so we worked with students who were part of intermediate colleges. So these are equivalent to 11th and 12th grade students, and half of our students were in the city of Ranchi, and the other half were in surrounding rural districts. So we worked with about 1,500 students across 10 colleges and 4 districts.
So Tanvi, how did you come to this problem? What inspired you to look at this issue?
So there were two things in terms of why I wanted to work on this project. One was one main motivation was that I wanted to collect data that would normally not be feasible for a standard household survey or a standard sort of survey that a government or an institution does. So this type of method, or the elicitation of subjective beliefs, is much more intensive. It requires a lot more time than would be possible in a standard survey that wants to collect a breadth of information on a lot of different things. And it's a new sort of angle to looking at this education choice problem. So one motivation was wanting to collect data on subjective beliefs, and the second part I'd say was fieldwork gives economists an opportunity to create sort of exogenous variation in the problem that they're studying. So it offers you a chance to be methodologically rigorous, and I wanted to do an experiment as part of my dissertation, and that's sort of another reason why I did this.
Your turn, Maureen.
So I'm Maureen Valentine. I'm a third year in animal science, and I study ruminant nutrition. So ruminants are animals with a 4-compartment stomach, so sheep, goats, deer, cows, etc. So I did my master's research in India with TCI with goats in Rajasthan, and then going into my PhD, I really saw the lack of feed that is available for livestock in India. It's a huge problem, and the livestock are very undernourished, and as you probably know, agriculture, the cropping system is very integrated with the livestock system, and there's a potential for livelihood improvements if we could improve the overall livestock system, meaning goats, cows, whatever it may be. So when you're trying to improve a livestock system, there's three main avenues you could take generally. There's genetics, there's health, so veterinary care and treating diseases, et cetera, vaccines, and nutrition. So nutrition tends to be one of the more complicated to do. It's different in all different places. There's not as easy of a fix as genetics and health. So usually projects that go in, they'll first get the health, because that's really easy. You provide vaccines, vet care, et cetera. Next, they'll go in with genetics, so they'll provide some superior stock, and over some years try and upgrade the breeding. And then nutrition is usually kind of left out there in the wings. So that was my overall reasoning for trying to look at this project and try and improve nutrition in the livestock system. And then after going to India for my exploratory research and meeting with people from the International Livestock Research Institute, they made it clear that the cow research is very much saturated by the government, and they felt like I would have more of an opportunity with the goat sector. It's really up and coming. There's a lot of money in goats right now, and most goats are in the hands of smallholder farmers. So if we could improve the production system, we could really divert income to the people that own the goats. So there's a lot of opportunity in that way. A lot of people kind of think that maybe we could improve the nutrition, which is kind of a nice idea, but the reality is that a lot of these people are so impoverished that they don't have the opportunity to eat their own livestock. They sell it. So the long game hope is that we could put more animal source foods into the market, which could eventually lower the price and eventually make it more available for poorer people. But in the short term, it's more about getting them income and selling their meat products. So that's kind of the reason why I went this direction, and ended up going to Orissa. So I was in the rural areas of Orissa. And so a lot of policymakers say that we should improve the livestock system, we should intensify the livestock system, people should feed better feeds, which is, of course, that's a no-brainer, but very few people actually go on the ground and try and do that and see what that will look like. How could we get farmers to actually change the system? What do they think about it? And all of those questions. So that was the main reasons why I wanted to go to the field, actually work with the farmers, do this project with them, and see how we could potentially improve their livestock system. So I ended up doing an experiment, and so I had one control group where they were just operating in their open grazing system with very little management, and then compared that to a treatment group where I provided feed and had a semi-intensive goat feeding system. And then over the course of 9 months, I compared a number of different health parameters between the two systems, and then also worked with the people to see what they thought about the system, how we could change it, et cetera. So that was the main idea, and I was there for the last year doing this research project.
That's great. So how did you guys, you had an idea in your mind of this is what you want to do, and somehow the location was kind of given in a way, right? They said, well, maybe among these, here's a place to go. So now you land there. What do you do? How do you go about getting organized and designing your work and getting started and moving forward?
I think a lot of the designing and planning starts not when you get there, but when you're in Ithaca or when you're at your university, because there are a lot of things that you can get out of the way while you're here, so you don't. So you're kind of prepared, and you don't need to get started from the scratch there. So once I had my broad research sort of question in mind, and your methodology is dictated by your research question, so you kind of need to figure those things out first. So you need to be sure about what is it. You need to be very clear about what is it that you want to study, and what are the expected outcomes, and what methodology you need to get there. And then I think the things that I did after figuring those out, there were a number of steps that I did in Ithaca first. So the first thing is to get your IRB approval, which is something that you need to get. It's a process that could take up to a couple of months, and that's something that needs to get started here. So a lot of people think that they need to have all their material ready before they apply for the IRB, but that's not true. You can, you apply with whatever you have, and then you can always file amendments to the IRB later on, as and when new information gets available to you. So that's something that you start sort of beforehand. you also need to figure out things like your sample size calculations and how much spatial and temporal variation you'll have in your project, and that's something again that someone at Cornell can help you with. So there's a Cornell Statistical Consulting Unit, and they help people with designing their sample sizes for their survey. So again, this is something that you should think about doing here and not trying to figure out when you're in a village with like limited internet and so on. So and that's also very important for, like, I think the first thing you need to plan your budget is your sample size. So those two things go together. So your sample size and formulating your budget and so on. And then so I guess those were, I also sort of started hiring my team while I was here, and that was something that helped me a lot. So I hired my main program or project coordinator while I was here, and I had my program coordinator start in the field before I got there. So a lot of the things that you need before you start your project are, you need all the relevant permissions from the relevant authorities. So because I was doing these surveys in high schools, I needed permission not only from the vice chancellor of the entire system, but also like individual college principals, and that takes, or school principals, and that takes a lot of time. So the permission process itself could take 1 or 2 months, and this is again something that I had my project coordinator do before I got there, because I didn't want to waste time, sort of getting stuck in bureaucratic hurdles once I get there. So I think that was another step. And then once you get there, you set up shop by hiring your team and training your team and then getting started.
So what was the most difficult thing you had to do?
I think in the initial stages, I think the permissions were really tough. So once you need to build a good amount of trust and rapport with the community and in the places where you're working, because if you don't have that support, and often you get all the necessary permissions, but you may still face problems later on. So I think initially for us, the most challenging part was getting all the permissions and then scheduling our surveys in these individual colleges, because we needed to do it after school hours, we needed to use their classrooms, and the hardest part was just getting started with hiring the team, training the team, and getting all the permissions. Once that was done, and then it was just a matter of replicating, the survey again and again. So I think the thing that really surprised me the most about fieldwork is how temporally concentrated the work is. So at the beginning, it's really, really hard because you need to get a lot of different things sorted. But once you start doing it, once you've done one survey, you know that every other survey needs to be identical, right? Like you can't be doing different things at different points of time. And then once it's replicated, then there's almost like no thinking on your part. So and at that point, it can even be like, do I even need to be here? But I think at the beginning, it's particularly tough when you're getting started.
Maureen, you had an even more complicated task. You had to deal with people and goats and fodder and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So how did you go about this?
So I think to Tanvi's point, the IRB, I also have the IA cook, so using animals, there's a separate protocol that we have to go through. So that was all sorted before I got there. And the permissions, I would agree, are some of the most challenging things to get through. I don't think I could have done that not being there, because once again, you have to build the connections, and without my face being there, I don't think the police would have made any effort to actually help me. But so I was working in the really rural areas of the Kandhamal district in Orissa, and it's a particularly vulnerable tribal group area. And so for that reason, usually foreigners are not allowed to go there. So they can go there for up to 1 week at a time, and you can get 2 permissions total, whereas I wanted to be there for a year, and the police had never dealt with that scenario before. So that was quite challenging, and that took me a good 3 or 4 months to finally get the permission of going back and forth. And it really came down to one police officer that I befriended, and he said that he would help me. Otherwise, I don't know that the project actually could have happened without him. But yeah, and mine was a little bit different also because I didn't know the place. I mean, we were in India at the same time, and I was still deciding between Bihar, UP, and Orissa, and then it was Orissa, and then so I kind of hit the ground running at that point. So I didn't have kind of the opportunity to start planning prior. And also I had the expectation that I would have a local partner that would be able to help me with some of the beginning logistics, but then it became clear that I would not have any local support. So then that was a realization that, like, okay, I need to find other networks. I ended up going through TIS to hire people and trying to use my connections that I had through ILRI. And so really the connections that you build they're so important. If you have any opportunity to go to networking meetings or conferences when you get there in your field and kind of meeting some of the higher up people in your field, I would definitely recommend doing that, because I went to a stakeholder meeting that ILRI had hosted on goat systems, and probably half of the people I met there ended up being very advantageous throughout my year. So yeah, getting the project started was definitely one of the most difficult things, also because mine was quite time sensitive, because I needed to start collecting in the summer season, which was slowly slipping away. So I definitely felt the pressure that I needed to get the feed, I needed to figure out my households, all those things, and ended up connecting with the animal husbandry department to select households and get started, as opposed to using the local partner that I had thought I would use. But all of that definitely took time and a lot of tripping and failures and trying something else, trying another network, trying different things.
So, unlike Tanvi, you had other issues to deal with. You were a foreigner living in a very remote area, and there were all kinds of challenges around that. Can you talk a bit about that?
So getting permission, like I said, was a huge barrier. So that was one thing. Of course, language. So I do speak a little Hindi, but I don't speak any Oriya. So I had a translator. My project coordinator and my translator were one and the same. So I'm completely dependent on this person. This person is my lifeline. And so if they forget to tell me something, or they run my life basically. So you have to trust that person entirely. Unfortunately, I had some problems with my first translator where we had some trust issues, and I ended up hiring a different person a little bit through. So that was definitely a challenge. I mean, when you don't understand the language, then you're kind of at the mercy of the people that are communicating with you. In addition, because of the logistical, just how the area is located, it's extremely rural, and the district headquarters is about an hour's drive from the actual villages. And just because of the way the project is, I needed to get there at about 5 or 6 a.m. because the goats will leave the village at around 7 or 8, and once the goats are gone, they're gone. So you need to get there at a very early hour before the goats go. And so I would need to get up sometimes 3 or 4 a.m. to get to the villages. As a result, I actually moved to the rural areas, which then was a whole other sort of issues, and some people were very nervous that I would be living in the rural areas and very little infrastructure there, food and water issues, so definitely a lot of challenges in that sort.
So all these women were watching you collecting feces from goats and all that?
Everybody watching me do everything.
Yeah. And so, I mean, they must have been asking you, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? So what did you tell them?
I mean, after a while, people obviously knew who I was. I mean, everybody kind of knew what I was doing, goat project.
Like a sentence or two to say, this is what I'm doing?
Yeah, I mean, my translator would translate, and they would also call us the goat party. So they'd be like, oh, the goat party's here, and they're doing goat things. So that was kind of the understanding in the villages that we were the goat people. And so yeah, everybody kind of knew what we were doing. But I mean, there's so much curiosity in India with foreigners. And so my translator, I think she got pretty tired of answering all the, what do I eat, and all those different questions.
So, Tanvi, what was the biggest surprise that you had in the field? Something that you'll remember years from now?
I think there's a lot of things about fieldwork that don't go according to plan, and those always take you by surprise. So it's obviously not like it's not like anything like being in a structured environment or in a university. So one major thing that threw us back or surprised us at the beginning was the fact that so I'm going to call these colleges, but they're actually high schools. So they're 11th and 12th grade equivalent, but they're called intermediate colleges. And so we thought that we'd get all these lists from the colleges, which we did. And obviously, given the population, there are like tons and tons of students in the registers. So we were like, this is great. We're just going to like, we have all these registers with us. We're just going to randomize, digitize all of this, randomize, and then go to these colleges and like tell the students who are part of our survey that they need to participate. And I knew it wouldn't be as smooth as that, but I didn't expect at all how far from reality that would be, because once you actually go to these colleges, there's probably like less than 5% of the students who are registered or are on the registers who actually attend these classrooms. So at the very beginning, what we had to do was entirely change our sampling frame. So we had to throw out of the window what we had as the list that the college gave us, and instead do a complete enumeration of the students who regularly come to college. So now that was our sampling frame. It wasn't just students enrolled in the college, it was students who come to college. And a lot of that, in some rural areas, like no one comes on a given day. And many of them are in like private tutoring centers around the college. So what we had to do was go individually to these private tutoring centers and like mobilize students there, tell them to come to college on a given day, where we would like where we would make an enumeration of their name and contact number and so on. So we went to private the private tuition centers where we didn't even know where they were. We had to like look at phone numbers like painted on walls and like use those to like call them up and be like, oh, are you like Ashish Tutoring Center? And then be like, yeah, and then we would like actually go there and like find the students. So it was a task, even though there's so many students who are supposed to be in these colleges, just actually finding our sample was really difficult, and mobilizing them was extremely difficult. So I think that was one surprise of how far from reality the sort of sampling process was. The second thing was that elections hit Ranchi or Jharkhand sort of in the middle of our field work, and the places where we were conducting a survey, they are used as survey booths, so polling booths basically, so for the elections. So we had to completely change the schedule of our survey around the elections. So this was another surprise. But I mean, I think at the beginning, these things would really sort of scare me a lot. Like, I would like actually be like up all night and really stressed about it. But I think over time, I think if you're mentally prepared that things aren't going to go the way you planned them, then you get sort of good at stomaching the risk and sort of just feeling more mentally prepared for it. And I think on the positive side of it, I think what came as a surprise to me was how much I think the project meant to my enumerators and the team that I was working with. I think it was a very big sort of event in their lives, and it kind of almost changed the trajectory of what kind of things they wanted to do after the project. And they were very committed. They really enjoyed the time that we spent together after a survey. If we went out to a restaurant or we went out for lunch, I think the project meant a lot to them, and it meant to me a lot too, but of course it had to mean a lot to me. But I was surprised that it meant so much to them, so I think that was a good surprise. Yeah.
Maureen?
So I think one of my biggest surprises, which definitely wasn't positive, but I like I said, I really came through the animal husbandry department to build these connections, find the villages, and so basically the bottom rung of the animal husbandry department in Orissa is the livestock inspector, and he was the man that would help me do the vaccinations of the goats and deworming the goats. And when demonetization hit, which was a big surprise, obviously, I had a lot of money problems and couldn't get money. I couldn't pay people, and he would help me. I could put money in his bank account, and he was a really great resource for me to be able to get money to people and pay for things, et cetera. And ended up finding on the last day that he had been stealing from one of the people that I had hired all year. So he would just come and take 2,000 rupees a month from the man that I was hiring, because he felt like he had facilitated the project and he was owed money. So that was extremely disappointing, and I contacted Animal Husbandry Department, and they said there's just nothing that can really be done about that. And they said God will take care of it. So unfortunately, that was really disappointing after working with someone for a full year, and then to find out that they're cheating you. But yeah, on the positive side, the animators were so happy about the project. So I hired one man in each village, and they were amazing. So they were the point people. They became such resources in the village, and I think they really elevated their status overall by being able to connect with, make all the connections to make the project run. So that was exciting.
I mean, something that both of you keep coming back to is the amount of project management and human resource management that you have to do. And obviously, we don't train you to do that. We kind of drop you there and say, okay, go ahead and do it. So, you know, you've both fired people and hired people. How did you figure all this out? Did you get advice from other people, or did you just say, oh, I'll just figure it out on my own?
Yeah, I think you just figure it out on your own. Like, I think what you have to do in a given situation is quite intuitive. Like, I guess it doesn't take a genius to figure out like what you need to do. I mean, I did have to fire someone midway. So a good thing about, I mean, it's not a good thing, but in terms of advice, in terms of how to go about managing a team, I think it's very worthwhile or useful to train more people than you'll eventually use in your survey. So I needed about 6 enumerators, but we trained 2 or 3 extra. And so you pay them for the training and you give them a certificate to say that they attended the training, but having the backup of people who know your instrument and who know how to do the work is really important. So midway, an enumerator of mine just stopped showing up, and he didn't call us, and he just stopped coming to work. And it was a very important part of the survey. So we also had all sorts of time constraints because we had to finish everything before the exams of the students started. So when this guy left midway, if I hadn't trained an extra person, that would have been disastrous. But you know, I was able to get that extra person on. And in terms of firing this person, you know, when he came back, he had a very like long sob story to say that he'd been like beaten up, and that's the reason. And his laptop had been stolen, and he was too like mentally disturbed to come to work. Which and you know, like over time you make friends with your enumerators, so it's hard to tell them that they can't work with you anymore, but you know, you have to do it because I'd already gotten a new person onto the team, and I couldn't ask that person to leave now. So I think it's not so much as, I mean, there is a lot of project management involved, but it's more I think just if you it's not more than the interpersonal skills that you probably use on a day-to-day basis. And I think that with a healthy amount of common sense, I think is kind of what's needed.
Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I think mine was a little bit different because we were in the same villages for the full year. So we're working with the same farmers every day. So I'm as dependent on them as the people that I'm paying are dependent on me, which put me in an interesting situation because they had some power over me. I was blackmailed on various occasions by my household, saying they were going to take their goats out of the study if I didn't pay them more, these kinds of things. And this is where my animators were amazing, because they know these people, they've lived with these people, and they could definitely they would try and sort it out, a lot of it before it would ever come to me. And then some of the things that came to me, then my translator and I would go and try and sort out the issues. But yeah, I mean, these people have been living next to each other for years. We had different religions, we had different castes. Some people were not allowed in other people's houses, within my households, within the animators, et cetera. So there's a lot of conflict management that had to happen just because we were working with the same people all year. And so they want everything to be, and also people kind of come from a background where maybe they've had government subsidies or government projects where everything is given fairly. So everybody's going to get the same amount of chickens, everybody's going to get a toilet, et cetera. But I didn't have the luxury of giving feed to every goat in that village. So definitely a lot of problems with trying to manage that, making sure the rest of the village is happy with things. And so it's definitely a huge thing that had to be addressed throughout the entire project.
Great. So each of you has your peers, your other PhD students in your class, and not everyone has gone out and done what you have done. Do you feel that things that you've learned and insights that you're bringing in that gives you an edge up over them, or that give you something new and different compared to what they were doing? Or do you feel like, you know, it would have been so much easier just to hang out and do the data work and get a thesis done?
Of course it would have been easier.
Why didn't you start, Maureen?
I mean, I think that before I even started this PhD, I knew that the fieldwork was a part of this program, and that was a huge draw for me in that in my PhD program, I also get all this work and management experience. So it's kind of it's a big bang for your buck in my mind, rather than just sitting here at Cornell and then I go to get a job and then I start to develop those management and work skills. So that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to come to Cornell and do the PhD here. And I totally agree that people that don't have the opportunity to do field work like this, they never have to manage a project and they just don't develop that skill set. Of course, when you're in the field and dealing with some of these challenges, it definitely will feel like a burden, and it'll be like, I don't want to deal with X, Y, and Z problem right now. I just want to focus on my statistics. I just want to do my research. That's what I want to do. But in the long haul, it's really valuable to have that experience.
Yeah, I think sort of my thoughts on this are similar to what Maureen said. I also was recently on the economics job market where I interviewed with both academic and non-academic places. So I think in the non-academic places, definitely many of them were very impressed with the fact that I had done an experiment which I did all by myself, and I managed an entire project by myself. And I mean, the technical aspects of it aside, I think they appreciated that I'd bring more to the table in terms of just initiative and managing people and managing projects and so on. I think in the academic side of things, especially among economists, they value fieldwork for fieldwork's sake less. It's more if the fieldwork sort of reflects in a really good paper. I think that's kind of that was my feeling in terms of when I interviewed with academic jobs. They do value fieldwork, but more in terms of the research that it brings, as opposed to the fact that you've done fieldwork. Because I guess when you, I don't know, that's the sort of feedback I got. But definitely with the non-academic jobs that require both research and project management and talking to people, managing people, I think I think my profile really stood out there.
And we're working on the economists to make them appreciate fieldwork
Yeah.
also. So what advice would you give this group here, people who are now starting to move to the field in a couple of weeks' time in some cases? Some people kind of wondering, a little bit hesitant and worried about what to expect. What advice can you give them as they go forward? Maureen?
I mean, you have to expect the unexpected with fieldwork. So I mean, that's a huge part of it. So I would try and have all your ducks in a row as much as possible with your IRB, and if you need an IACUC, and making sure that you have a good communication line with any advisors or professors you think they're going to offer you support, so that you can check in with them periodically, and have your research proposal as defined as you can. You have your sampling size all defined as much as you can, so everything is kind of laid out. And try to build as many connections as you can. Like I said, if there's people, certain organizations that you think you might be able to get data from or work with, potentially be really aggressive about reaching out to them, saying, I'm coming to India, could I meet you first? So before you even start the fieldwork, it'd be good to lay that foundation, because then if halfway through you need someone, you've already met that person and they might be willing to help you. So just help yourself out as much as possible to provide, try and get yourself as much support as you possibly can, because chances are maybe people you think are going to support you won't. And instead of doing it by yourself, then it'd be good to have backup support systems in place.
Yeah, I think what Maureen said is spot on. Like, you need to set yourself up when you're here to have a successful field experience and successful project in India. I think just to add to that, I'd also say that don't take on a field project if you don't believe in it 100%. So you need to sort of really believe that what you're doing in the field is going to be useful for you, and then also for your field and your subfield, because it's there are many times during fieldwork that you feel that you may feel disappointed or dismayed or discouraged, and so you need to really believe in what you're doing, and I think that's sort of an important motivator. And then So don't take on a project or a field project that you don't believe in 100%. And also, if you have a bad feeling about something or a certain project or a certain partner beforehand, then you're probably right about that bad feeling. So so you should, I think, raise those. Like, you shouldn't ignore those thoughts and be like, oh, it'll probably work out. Like, I mean, it's good to be optimistic, but I think it's also important to see the red flags beforehand, and then because you just have 1 year, right? And you're one person, and your entire PhD sort of revolves around this pretty high risk undertaking that you're doing. That's probably has implications for your first job, which has implications for like your career trajectory. So it's a huge. I mean, I think of it as a huge investment. So if something strikes you as a big risk, then you need to address that here, and then also just believe in your project.
Yeah. And to add to that, also the risk part, it's good to go into a project where you kind of feel like you know what the answer is going to be, as opposed to having a big risk where you're like, I wonder what's going to happen at the end of this project, because you could put a lot of time and effort to something and have nothing at the end of the day. So set yourself up for success, and if there's something, I mean, for example, if you're very dependent on a partner doing some big thing and you don't know if that's going to happen, try and have as many concrete things that you know that you can get done, as opposed to hoping that something is going to happen and then you can build on that finding.
Yeah. And as an advisor, I would say, before we send someone off to the field, I want to be sure that 80% can be locked in, that the real risky part could be 20%, but you're pretty sure that you'll get to 80%. And if I'm not that confident, then I won't send somebody off, because then it's not only risk that you're taking, but it's also risk that we're all taking in this happening. Then coming to this issue of when you're in the field and it's November, you've been there for 4 months and you're missing all the action in Ithaca, and there's all this grind that you have to go through. And remember, we are all just a call away. And so just calling up and saying, this is where I am, this is what's going on, and I need to figure out where I should move forward. And that's a really important resource to keep in mind, not just here, not just calling me in Ithaca, but also calling our office in Delhi and our office in Mumbai. Bhaskar Mitra is always ready to help and assist in any way he can. And in Delhi, we now have a vibrant team that's also become quite excited to be part of this process. So there are additional resources that have started to come in since both of you have been in the field, but hopefully that'll help future students coming into this. So now let me open this up and see if there are more thoughts and questions that come up or comments. Jessica?
I was wondering if you could please address 2 issues. One would be just beyond cultural sensitivity, but just how you bridge the gap. Because even if you're born and raised in India, you can go to places that feel very, very foreign in your own country. So I was hoping you could comment about just some of the challenges and also the surprising benefits or ways that this cultural experience has enriched your life, both personally and professionally. And then secondly, I'm hoping you can comment too on what you use for your own health, and specifically your mental health, given that one can face so many challenges when doing fieldwork.
I'll go first. So first on the mental health, I think set yourself up for success is my motto of this talk. But so I mean, for example, I would be in the rural areas for a long time, and that was a rough place mentally for me to be. It was very dark and kind of dank, and I couldn't eat the food, and it was a difficult place to live long term. And so I also had a place in Bhubaneswar, in the main city, And I needed that. I needed to be able to get out and kind of go to Bhubaneswar sometimes, and I think that's okay. Like, I mean, I feel a little bit bad about it, but I was like, no, I need this. You know, I can't be in the rural areas for the entire year. So I basically was there maybe 60% of the time, and in Bhubaneswar 40% of the time, where I could go and get stock up in the grocery store and all that kind of stuff. And I think that helps a lot. And also, the connectivity was really difficult in the rural areas. So basically, I would sometimes be able to call people, but even phone connectivity was difficult and didn't really have internet. So being able to go back to the city and emailing my advisors, and that was definitely very helpful and required. Also, having food, food is a big issue, you know, so not having the food that you want in the rural areas, I would just try and stock up on as many of the kind of creature comforts that I could get to have those in the rural areas. And honestly, I would look forward to my granola bar every day, you have no idea. It was the best part of my day. But little things like that can really get you through the hard times where you kind of feel like mentally you're just army crawling day to day to get the work done, and trying to have some grit to see the long game and just be like, I gotta finish this, I gotta get to this next milestone, and it's gonna be okay. You know, everything's temporary, it's not gonna be like this forever. What was the first question? Cultural. So yeah, the culture couldn't probably be any different for me from where I was. I think my most rewarding cultural exchanges are with my translators or my project coordinator, so my master's and for this experience also. I went to the wedding of my master's translator, and that was amazing, and I talked to my translator from this experience all the time. She just got a job with Heifer International, and she texted me and she's like, so can you tell me how to feed a goat? And I was like, yeah, I can. She's like, I should have paid attention last year. So those experiences have been great because they're both women, and I was with them a lot of time and really exchanged a lot with those people. And then, of course, it's just always fun to be in the villages. I'm such an anomaly for people there, and they just get such a kick out of everything that I do. So that's just always, they're like, oh, she's drinking water, or she's doing this. You know, everything is fun for them. So that's just a fun experience to be able to kind of see me through their eyes being so different.
Yeah, I think compared to Maureen, I had it actually pretty easy because I was living in Ranchi, which is it's a nice city, and there were times where when we were surveying in the rural areas where we stayed there, but it wasn't more than two weeks. So, and even I think this is a good resource. So the place where we were in the places close to the rural areas, even the hotels weren't good, but we found a Christian missionary, and they had good food that they would serve in their canteen, and also they had places to sleep, which we thought was a lot cleaner and safer than staying in a hotel. So you could scout around and see if there is a place like that close to where you're doing your field work. So I think logistically, I wasn't very uncomfortable. I was mostly in the city, and I was sharing an apartment with another group that is a Cornell it's a Cornell group called Agua Clara, and they set up clean water drinking plants in different villages. And at that time, they were working in Jharkhand, so I shared an apartment with them, and all of them went to Cornell. So it was really great to be able to come back home after a hard day of either not getting a permission or our surveys, the days we had surveys, it was really tough. It's quite tough managing high school students and getting everything done on time. So the survey portion was very mentally draining, but every day I had friends to come home to, which was I guess great. And I think I realized that most people can't have that with their survey, but if there is any way that you can marry convenience with your project, I think that's a great way to maximize success of the project, because you need to be on top of your game if your project is going to succeed. And just being able to stay with people who were my friends, that helped me a lot. And I think in terms of cultural sensitivity, it wasn't such a big issue for me. I'm Indian and I speak Hindi, which most people in Jharkhand speak, but I think even for me, I did everything that I could to just blend in. So I would mostly just speak in Hindi. I wouldn't speak in English that much, and yeah, I didn't do anything to like stand out as being different or coming from a foreign university. I mean, all of that was there at the backdrop. Like my team sort of looked at me differently, but at the same time, you know, I made every effort that I could to be just sort of as someone who's like, I would mostly just be like, yeah, I've only been there for like 2 years. Otherwise, I'm just like from here. And yeah, so it was just, yeah.
It's good. When I speak Hindi, I stand out. Everybody says, oh, he's not from here. All right, what else? Any other comments?
So I had a question for Maureen, like, so the personal aspect of things, like how would you unwind, like you would go to Bhubaneswar, but still did you have like a group of friends or like expats that you knew or people from Cornell?
No, I didn't know anyone there, so that was unfortunate. So I would just kind of go to nice restaurants or I had an apartment there, so that was nice to be able to, but yeah, I didn't really meet anybody there. I wasn't really there in a steady way, and I don't know if there are very many expats there. I couldn't find any, at least.
Mark?
I have a comment and then a question. This is picking up a point Prabhu mentioned at the outset about the connection, the very important connection between field work and rigor. One of the most important moments in research and science in general is problem specification. And one of the most vexing problems for economists are these little ticklish problems called omitted variables or misspecification. And field work is an opportunity to help solve that problem.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that not all economists recognize that. And we are working on that. So it is waiting to blend it. And I think for more broadly in the philosophy of science, Maureen's work early on in economists, understanding what the real contours of the problem are, I think are critical. I'm sure both of your field work did that. So I have two questions related to that. One, how did it cause you walked in as you arrived in the country with a certain idea of what you would be studying, what the problem was. Can you talk, each one of you, about how the problem changed? And then related to that, did you go into the field knowing how long you were to spend there? Was that determined a priori? Or did you go rather in a way that could be disturbing, saying, I'll leave when I'm done, and who knows how long it will last? So the question is one about the problem specification. Did you understand, how did the problem itself change in your eyes? And then the raw duration, which is a more practical consideration.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you raised about the fact that that fieldwork gives you a chance to be to solve the omitted variable bias, and I think that economists do recognize that, and they do reward sort of original data work. It's more in terms of whether you did the fieldwork yourself or did you have like, I mean, people have like job market papers that are based on experiments, but often they themselves aren't there the whole time. So it's a little bit tricky in terms of what exactly like economists value in terms of fieldwork, but or the academic circle values. But I'd say for sure another thing that contributes to fieldwork making your dissertation much more rigorous is that it forces you to think from a research design perspective. So you're forced to define your question and your hypotheses beforehand. So you might have something a little different and then you do an exploratory project and that changes a little bit. But going in and when you collect your data, you've defined your methodology, you've defined your research questions. So once you get the data, like, and just doing that is like 60-70% of your paper, right? Like after you get the data and your results are about 30%, but it does provide you with an opportunity to not data mine or to not like sort of think of your research question after the fact, and I think that's one way in which fieldwork makes you more rigorous, and I really appreciated that. And I think in terms of just how my problem changed, I'd say that I did an exploratory sort of bit before the main survey where I went and talked to different students and colleges and tried to understand their like what are the different degrees or courses that students study after high school, what goes into them deciding sort of how to choose their track and so on. So I think the exploratory experience helped me form the project the problem specification, and also the piloting the survey in another location, in another college that wasn't part of the main sample, really helped me sort of work out the way the subjective beliefs questions needed to be asked, because the way I did it in the pilot, a lot of people couldn't really understand what they needed of me. So that piloting the survey itself helped me develop the questions more carefully. In terms of how long I'd be there, I think that also I got a sense after the exploratory visit, because I knew that I had a short window to work with, because like the students take a 1 month long holiday around Diwali and Dussehra, so I knew I didn't have all of October. I also knew they'd be off in like the minute they have a preparatory break for exams, and that was going to be in March. So I knew that I had like a 3 to 4 month window to like finish whatever I had to. Otherwise, I'm not going to get these same students again. So often your timeline is dictated by, like, it could be seasons or just something else that dictates your research project. So I kind of went in with a very specific timeline in mind, and I knew I had to stick to it. Otherwise, I wouldn't get it. Yeah.
For the time, mine is based on season, so that's why I was in such a time crunch to get started before the rains came. In the back of my mind, I was like, if we can get started, I have to stay through the next summer, which I really didn't want to do, but I was really hoping that I could get it all done in those 3 seasons, so that worked out well. And the way that I had kind of crafted the research question, so I mean, there's goats everywhere in India, so you could look at any livestock system and then say, how do I improve it from this baseline? So kind of knowing that in advance, I went into the research question was based on whatever, let's look at the baseline and then how can we improve upon that baseline. But this was a unique place in that these people, it's a tribal area, so they don't drink milk, which was really interesting. So usually the cow has a really high value, but in this situation the cow doesn't have a very high value because they don't drink milk, and more the cow makes the bull and the bull plows the field, and so that's why they have cows, so goats were actually pretty high up on the totem pole, which was kind of a unique situation. In other places in India, the cow would be a lot more important. And the open grazing, so they were open grazing and they only have one cropping system. So certain things were definitely unique to that area and then defined the project going forward.
Sorry to interrupt, but your master's thesis, which you referred to earlier, that also was in India?
Yeah, that was in Rajasthan.
Yeah. So, and how long did you stay for that first?
I was in 4 months in Rajasthan. And that was an already defined goat project. So that was a goat development. It was called I Am Goats, India Mozambique goats. And that was with BIFE and ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute. That was in Rajasthan, Jharkhand, and also in Mozambique. So there are 3 sites, and it was a pretty massive project. And they were mainly focusing on health and genetics was the main portion of that project.
Okay. Anthony.
I have a question that I imagine pertains more to Maureen, but I don't know, maybe Tanvi has something to say as well. Just because my work also requires a great deal of material items, I'm really interested in how you managed bulk materials and dealt with deploying material goods in the field in a way that was consistent and appropriate.
So one thing that was a big logistical hassle was figuring out how to chop straw. So I had to buy, the chopping machine is quite a large apparatus and it's quite expensive, so I had to buy it in the Catwell in Cuttack, which is near Bhubaneswar, and then bring it on a truck. So that was difficult, and that ended up being at my animator's house, and then he chopped all the straw, so I gave him some extra money. So he chopped straw, he mixed all the feed, and then the other animator came and picked it up from him, and so everything was basically done in the same place, and then we divvied it up by day. So they actually wanted to do it by week, but I was like, I don't want the households have any hands in the mixing of the feed, so I want it to be the exact same every day. So the feed was given on a weight basis of how many goats were in that household. So if there's 10 goats and they all weigh 20 kg, then they should eat a certain amount based on their body weight. So each household was given a certain amount of feed based on the body weight of their goats that they should feed per day. And then they were given bags on a daily basis that they would feed. So that was the main thing that I had to manage as far as the uniformity of the diets and everything. But I did have to ship in feed from different places, and So all those were just logistics that had to happen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm actually more interested in the logistical side of things. Can you elaborate on how that process worked? Like how you made such arrangements to get those shipments in and to the sites that you needed it to be at?
Mm-hmm. So my original idea in the onset was I wanted to find locally sourced feed sources and then use those. So that I wanted it to be cost effective, I wanted to use local byproducts. And the reality was that nobody feeds livestock at all. So because cows are not a very valued livestock, they don't feed them anything extra, where a lot of other places in India, they would provide feed to cows. So there were no feed options available. So so then that became clear, and then I got on the phone to a lot of people figuring out where is cattle feed in the state, where are there extra rice straw stocks in the state. So that was a process over about the course of a week of trying to figure out what feed resources are available within the state. Where can I get a truck? How much is a truck going to cost? How much is it going to cost per bale? I distinctly remember my project coordinator yelling at me that you have to make a decision, we have to get the feed, and I'm like, because I felt like I was really losing a part of my design. Like I wanted it to be locally sourced and I wanted it to be economical, and I felt like I was losing that. So sometimes you have to let those things go. But so yeah, that was a lot. I mean, and my project coordinator was the one that's on the phone with the people trying to coordinate where the things are, how much everything's going to cost, and doing all that. Mm-hmm.
This side. Matthew.
Considering you spent so much time in the field and there were so many challenges that you did come across, is there any support that you would have liked to be there but you didn't get that maybe can be rectified, just in terms of designing your field work and carrying out your research?
I mean, of course, always more support is great. I mean, so I really didn't have much support. So I think a local partner, if I could go back and do it over again, I would make sure that the local partner was going to help me. I think a lot of problems that I had was because I had to make my own network of people. And so I'm taking risks with, can I trust this person? All these kinds of things. Whereas if you're going into an already established network, then you have a pretty good idea that they've worked with these people before, they're not going to cheat you, that kind of stuff. So having a good local partner, I think, will go a really long way. So that would, of course, been really nice. But I ended up more going in through the animal husbandry department. And I used the lab for the animal husbandry department at Fulbani. That was really great. And they ended up offering me a lot of support. So that was really helpful. And then, just kind of logistics are difficult. Like finding accommodation ended up being a real challenge for me. And I think as more students are going into the same places, there will be more of a network of support just by default. So I'm sure that will be helpful, where people have an idea of like, these are the places where you can go, or these are people you can contact. Mm-hmm. Being the first person always, it's hard to lay that foundation.
And be much more of local infrastructure kind of coming together with various projects that are happening now.
I think I'd say the biggest person who supports you, and I guess who supported Maureen as well, is your project coordinator. So they're the ones who are managing the enumerators. They are kind of the first point of contact where everything gets done. Like what you want should happen. Like the project coordinator is the one who initiates all of that. So even if you want to like buy material from people, like you need to have, it's more practical to have them call up those people. And then even for my permissions, like eventually, like he couldn't get all the permissions. Like I had to go show my face, but he laid the groundwork. He went and sat there like 2-3 times before I would go and meet with the person. So, and then in terms of even like communicating with enumerators and so on. So I think the project coordinator is the biggest sort of source of support for doing your field work. And I hired this person, Lal, who is now working with TCI. So he has an opportunity to work with another PhD student who might go on the field. So I think in terms of maybe, so now TCI has like a few people who've served as project coordinators in other projects, and I think when they go work in different projects, they'd be the biggest sort of source of support.
And these people like Lal, for example, he has a master's degree, mm-hmm. right? And he's from TIS and good English skills, good management skills, and so he's now helping Shuli with her work. So we're building up that local capacity, which is really important also. Vidya.
Yeah. So this is about
how you handled connectivity issues. So you mentioned that in the field, some days you might just not even have telephone connectivity, and quite often you didn't have access to internet. And I'm pretty sure you might have had to stay in touch with a lot of very important people who are very crucial for your research. So how did you strategize and handle, so suppose you wanted to send out a really important email, but just couldn't get to it. Did you bucket your tasks, and what were your strategies to handle that?
Yeah, so when I was in the rural areas, I didn't have it, and it just, or I mean, yeah, sometimes a WhatsApp message will go, sometimes it'll take 2 days. I mean, you just never know. There was also electricity problems, so we would have just a whole day of no electricity probably once a week. So you kind of are just expecting for those things to happen, or it happens, one day it happened for like 3 days. So you just don't know. So you try to not make yourself be dependent on it because you don't know if it's going to be there, number one. And yeah, so I would basically, I still have my computer, I would still write all my emails and just have them saved in my drafts. And then once I got, if I would go to the Fulbani, which is like the district headquarters, I would just send 20 emails straight away in 5 minutes, So kind of just be prepared. And I don't know if anyone's going to use the ODK, the software, but it is great, and you should learn how to use it because you're probably going to want to use it there. And it's kind of a pain. It probably took me a week to get the code set up, so it's good to have that ready to go before you go. And there is a way to use that offline, so that was really helpful, which I didn't know at first. So that was helpful to know.
Yeah. Remember we talked about it. Use it offline. Yeah. But I think connectivity is a problem, but not having electricity is often a bigger problem, because even when there is connectivity, there isn't electricity. So I had these portable battery, so they were quite heavy duty portable battery stations, like I don't know what they're called. They're just like a battery charger thing. And so when we were doing our surveys in classrooms, power banks, but like big ones.
So they're like car batteries? But
yeah, they're like car batteries. They last for like about 8 to 10 hours. So our survey also needed a projector and like a screen, projector screen. So we had pocket projectors and a screen. But when we would go to these classrooms, there wouldn't be electricity, so we couldn't connect those anywhere, and that's what we used the power banks for. So that was our source of electricity to power the entire survey session. But that also helped to charge our phones when we were away. And I mean, if there's no connectivity, there's nothing you can do, but you can work around the electricity.
You can still type out your
Yeah.
We also had an inverter in our house, which gave us an extra 10 or so hours of power.
Great. Any other comments?
I have a question. Yeah, so this is more in terms of how we frame a question. So when we frame a hypothesis before going to the field, one of the things that crosses our mind is how much of it can be generalizing. It's an important aspect when you answer the question. And since one spends a lot of spend a lot of time in the field, so does that thought, and the context much more better than a person who is using data and working on it. So does the time come when you start thinking that the question that you're answering is only local or contextual? I can't generalize. I mean, does the thought come, and if it comes, how do you respond to that thought in your head and the final output paper?
Yeah, it's hard because that thought comes and the opposite also. Like, am I asking things that aren't like exactly relevant to them? So I think it could work both ways, and it's very challenging because you don't know many of these things until you get started quite a bit, and once you get started quite a bit, it's almost too late to change things. So, and also there's quite a bit of inertia in making like honest changes because you've already invested so much time and effort into getting something started. So I think so I think as much of exploratory research that can be done, I think that's crucial. So like TCI not only funds the fieldwork, but it also funds an exploratory visit, and I think that's sort of very important to get your hypothesis started, because once you start collecting data, there's like nothing really that you can change at that point. So otherwise, like the 200 surveys you've already done sort of go to naught. So I mean, you can change some questions around still probably, but yeah, I think a lot of what you're saying needs to be figured out in the exploratory stage.
And remember, the committee helps also, because the committee is full of these wise people that can figure out general versus specific and all that. Any other comments? Yeah.
So, have you guys thought about how you want to? When I used to do field work, the one thing that would sort of strike me is what am I doing with my research and how am I giving back to the society that I'm collecting the research from. Are you guys? I know you're a PhD student, so that is not your main concern. But is this something that you're thinking through and you have some ideas about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think being a part of TCI, that is we want to have deliverables. We want to be able to be applied in what we're doing. So I'm hoping to validate a software system that could be used for ration balancing of goats. So that's one tool that I think will be helpful going forward. And then I have made a lot of connections with the animal husbandry department and the forest departments there. So I told them, and they were all interested in getting, they want to see what happened. They want to see the results of everything. And definitely planning to communicate with the animators about what happened. And they don't have internet, but at least they can call and understand whatever all happened. And hopefully some policy recommendations would be able to be disseminated.
And that's part of the role of TCI also, to say, okay, here's the results, let's move them down to advocacy or implementation, etc. Good. I think we're coming to that time of the day. Do you have any last comments you want to make?
I think we said a lot.
I think there's one thing that's really important for us all to understand. Going out and collecting data is an important part of what we do. But you could also be collecting data for someone else's study. What's unique here is you're actually designing the study. You're designing what data needs to be collected, what metrics need to be established, then designing the questionnaire, and then doing the survey, doing all the project management around it. So you're getting a complete holistic experience of doing field-based research. And that's crucial, because that then stays with you for the rest of your life. And then in the future, when you're designing other studies, etc., these experiences will come back and guide you through that. And I think if we can get that streamlined, that would be a major contribution of this program. So thank you all. This was wonderful. Let's give the two panelists a great hand.